5 years ago tonight, Raymond Abraham gave a lecture at SCI-Arc. Finished the lecture, had dinner, had a few drinks, went out in the streets and got hit by a bus.
Yeah.
I
thought it was a streetcar.
And no more streetcars. That was Gaudi. And what we decided to do was to have a series of talks, one a year. So this is the 5th anniversary, and I just wanted to thank the people who participated in that sequence, and this is the final step, or the last episode. Stephen Hull, who is not here tonight, just left town, gave the first talk. Tom Main gave the second talk. I gave the third. Wolf Pricks gave the fourth. And we've invited Frank to speak to you tonight as the 5th
But
step.
I didn't prepare a talk. You were going to talk to me, I heard.
I am. Give me a second, man.
Okay.
I'm a slow learner.
I ain't got any notes or anything, and I don't even have a fucking philosophy. I don't have a fucking...
We know that's not true. So let me say a word or two about Raymond, who turned in his Austrian passport, left Cooper, came to Los Angeles, and we hired him here to teach, and he was represented variously by different people as the quintessential misfit, as an extraordinary teacher, as a fundamentalist, and I thought we could start with asking Frank, who knew Raymond, I think knew him reasonably well, to comment a little bit. No comment?
Yeah.
A little bit on Raymond.
I didn't know him that well. Huh? I didn't really know him that well.
Yeah.
I got invited to give a talk at that school in New York. What's it called? The Haydick School. Cooper. And the talk was there's a chapel in the basement, right, at Cooper? Is that true?
There's a great hall.
Yeah, so I was in there.
Yeah, that's big.
And the guy in the front row was this guy, Raymond Abraham.
Uh-oh.
And he wasn't very friendly. I mean, I was insecure already, right? To be there, and it was, Haydick was a big deal to me. And Raymond just sat there sort of scowling at me. And I got the impression he didn't like what I was saying.
Which wouldn't be unusual.
Which wouldn't be
like
unusual.
What anybody was saying.
Things changed over time. I keep meeting him, and he scowled less and less. And finally, he was friendly toward the end there. I think because I kind of loved what he was doing in New York, that funny building he did, which you could, I loved his passion for what he was doing, his willingness to take the heat for what he was doing and to see it through to a finished building. For me, the building part of things is the most important to get, because I'm not a theorist and I don't draw like Lebbeus Woods, right?
I don't know. You
I
tell
don't
me.
So I don't theorize in drawings, and so it was interesting to see a guy that came from that actually building a building, and with the passion he had, and then his years later, during that and after, till he died, was focusing, I think, on on actually building stuff,
Right.
and the construction process and the stuff you have to do to get something built, which ain't a picnic sometimes. But
Yeah, good. Okay.
is that enough?
That's great. So this is, you see, this one?
You can't rehearse something you ain't
Yeah,
done.
okay, so you sent this to me
Yeah.
a couple months ago in a slight.
Well, Wayne Shorter, you know who that is.
Yeah.
The guy. So I was with him at a thing, and he was being honored, and they showed a film of him preparing for a whatever he did with his guys. And in came the guitarist and put up the stand, and in came the somebody else, and the trumpeter and the drums, and they were setting it all up. And then in comes Wayne, and they said, "Hey, Wayne, what are we going to rehearse tonight?" And he said, "You can't rehearse something you ain't invented yet." And that was pretty spectacular, because that's probably...
Right. I got this from Frank, who sent it to me in email.
I thought
month
you
ago.
might like it. That's why I sent it to
Yeah,
you.
it helped. So I'm returning.
Don't make a manifesto out of it, don't.
Give me a chance, you might like it. But
I'll call Wayne if you screw up his thing.
yeah, let's get him. Let's get him in here. Give him equal time. So Wayne Shorter was a jazz musician.
Played with Miles.
Saxophonist. Played with Miles
Played
Davis.
with Miles. He and Herbie Hancock.
And I think what's interesting about the process, and maybe it has something to do with the way you work, has to do with jazz and what jazz is, in the sense that you might start at a point and you might not know where you'll end up.
But I think that's not only jazz. I think if you listen to read Pierre Boulez with his music, it was the same. You try something. He played with 3 notes. I don't remember what they were. There was a B flat in there somewhere, but and he manipulated the piano, the sounds, until he got a sound that he was searching for a sound that had some gravitas, that was not just benign and soft. He was searching for a something sound, and then he found it with these 3 notes, and he made chords with them on the piano, and then he brought in all the instruments and created derive, it's called, I think, derive.
Right.
And it's pretty spectacular.
It is.
What he did, but I think it's like jazz. It's like the way we work. You know,
Right.
you build. In architecture, the issue is there's a client, there's a contractor, there's a few other guys like our project managers that we don't really need those guys, but and there's a building department, and there's a bank, and there's money, and all those things. I think if we're honest about it, we derive or develop our work in that context and use those instruments like the 3 notes maybe, in a way. And you build on a sense of what's appropriate for the topic. So if you're doing a house that has a set of constraints and a set of ideas and people with a certain amount of money, so you got to be careful about budgets. And if you're doing a tower, which is many houses, that has another story. It has the city, it has the planning department, it has a lot of bureaucracy between you and the end. and the construction people, the contractor, and then the marketing people, and then all of that stuff. So I think in a way, you're playing jazz all through that. All these things are happening to you as you on the way to your so-called finale, which never is a real finale anyway, but you're in movement toward a finality, and these forces are in play, and depending on how your own personality comes into this, your own values, your own character of do you respect the client, or is the client somebody you just used on the way to get a funny building built? And so there's all these issues, and some people say, get out of the way, client, I'm going to give you this thing, and take it or leave it. And I think Raymond did that a few times, and other people have done that. It happens. It happens, yeah. I think, I mean, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I always find there's an inspiration in the project, and the client is a collaborator in my cases, and I like to develop a relationship with them to end up with what they want, and end up with what they want for the price they ask for. Whether they can afford more or not, I take them at their word that this is what they want to spend, and I do my best to get it there for that price.
Let me ask you to intervene in that.
So that's a lot of bullshit I'm talking about.
No,
right?
that's all right. That's all right. Well, as you know, I don't know much about banks and clients and building departments, and what I wanted to emphasize was the relationship of the quote to the process of actually conceptualizing a building, and you've enlarged it and brought in clients and banks and project managers and so on, who are obviously part of the process. But what I thought would be worth talking about is that if that's how long can you play jazz, I guess, is the question. And this has to do with time, and it has to do with experience. In other words, how many times can Wayne walk into that room and move the stand and move the chairs and so on? Is there, this is a hypothesis, do you have to start over at some point? Or is the fact that at least initially when you start, and the conceptual destination isn't so clear, or it's funny, you're intuiting your way, and then you've done it a number of times, and the question is there some redundancy? And then you have to say, when Wayne comes back the next time, see these 3 notes? I'm never going to play them. You know what I mean? In other words,
yeah, you can do that. I think if you take the Wayne Shorter thing further, that this is a guy that's played the saxophone for 50 years, 60 years, 50 years anyway, and played with some of the great bands, knows his topic, knows the terrain, so he's an informed musician. And so he's going to bring, I mean, if he practiced for a month and figured out a new set of chords, he would bring that to this, even though he's not ready to rehearse it, because he's in the process of inventing it. I think maybe that's what you're getting at. There is a process toward the invention that you can't sort of dismiss and say this about.
It's tough to say things like
Yeah,
that. I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
such a
yeah.
great quote because the idea of practice and
Right.
ultimately a kind of redundancy, and if you don't really know what the hell you're doing.
Yeah, but in his case, which is not a building department, not a project manager, not a contractor, he doesn't have all this stuff that we
Right.
have. So, and he's been playing this thing for a long time, and he knows these people, and they've been playing together. So what he's talking about is he's going to come in with a whole new set of chords or sounds,
Right.
and lay it on the table, and they're going to do what they do is support him in that and create what probably is a new piece of music that hasn't been heard before. I think ideally that's what he's talking about.
Right. I think what I'm saying is, do we worry, or do you worry that practice gets to be practiced as opposed to going back to a point where you can't rehearse because you really don't know? Maybe you've answered that.
I don't know. Ask me another question.
Okay. Okay. I was thinking about this last night, and not this one. Hey, hold on. We get to this. And I remember you guys did an interiors at Barrington and Wilshire
Yeah.
years ago. You remember?
Yeah.
And you took me through that thing.
Yeah.
I remember we were walking
I
through
took
it.
Craig Hodges through it too.
I don't.
Craig, do you remember? Okay.
Yeah. So Craig will ratify the question. And you said to me, and I remember this, it stuck in my head, if somebody like Haida could just read me the Le Corbusier poem to the right angle, and you said, Moss, there's not a single right angle in this
I was
project.
lying.
Huh? There were a few.
Yeah.
But the point was there, which is, you won't like the word, but a polemical stance, like they're all over here, I'm going over here.
No, I never thought about it that way. I never thought about it that way. I had and have had all these years great respect for Eisenman and Hayduk and some of them, like Michael Graves, had a lot of power coming out of the gate. And I was very interested in what everybody was doing. I knew I wasn't going to do that, what they were doing. I knew that. And I didn't get to meet any of those people until after I did my house, right? So in 1978, I had $40,000. I bought this dumb house, and I owed the mortgage, and I borrowed $40,000 from a friend. And that's how much money I could spend on it. And I did my thing. I wrapped the thing around the old house and made what I could out of it. And it started some kind of interest in what I was doing. Even you came to look at it, I remember.
You invited me.
Oh, I did? I know. So, and I think your pedal house has something to do with what I was trying to do. So, and I was interested in all of that I started something that others were interested in, and people I liked, loved, had an interest in it. What was the question?
Well, yeah. You answered it. I mean, it had to do with the thing on Barrington and Federal. I think you answered it.
Yeah.
No,
So
almost no right angles.
No, I was just
Looking.
exploring things
Yeah.
that I thought were interesting to
Right.
explore. No, I mean, the context, you know, that's been written about so many times, is I was hanging out with the LA artists,
Yeah.
right? And Billy Al and Ed Moses, and they were all working with rough carpentry and building their studios, and that was, and I had come from the Gruen thing, the Austrian Baumfeld guy, who wouldn't let me, if I didn't meet the corners exactly, he would throw it away and make me start over again. So I thought that's what I had to do, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't have clients to do it, and Rauschenberg had done the combines, and I was in awe of that, and so I thought, well, shit, if they can make art out of junk that people are buying, I could probably do the same with buildings. It was like...
But that's a little facetious. You don't really believe it's junk.
No, but, well, in the case of
Not onyx
Rauschenberg, it
and
is an old tire and a goat and a...
No, I meant the
a
house.
stuffed hawk.
And then you came back and you guys redid the house.
Well, that's a whole other story.
All right, let's...
That
Yeah.
I had a dream about that my mother was in a pink dress in a helicopter, and it was going to crash down, and I woke up. And I called Philip Johnson, and I said, I have to remodel the house because I got another kid, and he needs a room and stuff, and I think I'm going to lose it with this change. And he said, oh, come on, Frank, it's been photographed all over hell. Don't worry about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I got the blessing from the king. I had the dream about my mother. I thought, okay, I'll do it. So I did it.
Maybe she was worried about the roof leaking.
Yeah, right. And then Philip Johnson came out to visit me. And he walked through and he said, you sure lost this one.
He should know, right? But we don't care about any New York benedictions anyway, do we?
I think, they're friends. He's a good guy.
Yep.
Let
me ask you, the second recollection, a few years later, I was in your office, and I don't know, we were looking at some projects. He took a piece of paper, wrinkled up the piece of paper, walked over to a desk. This must have been before Bilbao. Walked over to a desk, wrinkled it up, put it on a counter or something. Cameras picked it up, and all of a sudden it showed up on a screen in 3 dimensions.
I don't remember doing that. That sounds great.
You didn't. I made it up.
Oh, okay.
But the point was, all of a sudden this was a new device, and I think what's always interested me in terms of an inventive or an imaginative capacity is that speaking of Leb, that there's an imaginative capacity that has to do with a concept, and then there's a capacity that has to do with the implementation, which is quite different. Not only the political side, but the technical side and the drawing side. And so unveiling this thing, I remember that discussion. It's subsequently been useful to lots of people in this room, lots of people around the world. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, you need that in order to do the other thing.
Well, that's been a big part of my life. I hate the idea of being marginalized by the construction industry, as architecture has been, and I think the AIA inadvertently, by overprotection, it has infantilized us. So we don't take responsibility. I even see it in my own office. Yesterday, the guys, we hired a new curtain wall consultant. I hope he's not in the room, but for a project. And I said, why'd you hire the curtain wall? He said, well, it gives us legal protection to have. And I said, bingo, that's the exact thing I'm trying to fight against. Is that you got to take more thing like, and when Jim Glimpf was in the office and we talked about this issue way back at the time when I did the first Vitra, the little Vitra building, and I had trouble describing a compound curve with the tools I had from school, which was descriptive geometry. And so I was drawing this thing and making it all relevant, and they built it, and there was a kink. And the contractor proved to me that he actually followed my drawings, so it was my fault that I didn't represent it properly. Now, it wasn't my fault, but it was both of our faults. It was the process fault. Anyway, that led me to Dassault and CATIA, and it didn't happen overnight. It was a year or so in between, but and when I realized the power of the tools that were available, I dreamt or speculated that the architect could regain control of the game by whoever has the most information wins. And so all of a sudden you have the most information. And we tried it in, the first one was the big fish sculpture in Spain, which we were doing with Skidmore, and they had CAD, they were using the CAD program. And the contractor couldn't build it from their drawings. And we had just started with Dassault and CATIA, and I got the contractor a workstation, an Italian firm, Permastellisa, does a lot of curtain walls and stuff. And Massimo, the owner, after a week called me and said, perfecto. So that was encouraging. And then Bilbao, we sent a team over and trained the contractors and the subcontractors to use the program. And you have to understand, I mean, you probably tried it. The CATIA is really complicated. It's for airplanes and stuff. And we trained them how to use it. And the bids came in, the only one I remember the numbers on was the steel bids. There's no two pieces of steel the same in that building. And the bids came in 18% under budget, 6 bidders with a 1% spread. So if you're in the building industry, you know that you can pick any one of them because it's a safe, the chances are there's no wild card.
Right.
You usually get a wider spread. And then they built it for that. They made one mistake, that as they were constructing it and bringing the pieces together in space, it didn't quite match. So they had to put change a few pieces of steel. But man, the lights went off in my head then.
Right.
And so I started pursuing it. We developed an add-on to it called Digital Project to make it simpler. And then we gave it to Zaha, Nouvelle, whoever was available.
Yep.
I tried to spread the word. And
I think my point, and it's not to denigrate the value of CATIA or the way you used it, either a broader point or a narrower point, which just has to do with the necessity when you make something that hasn't been rehearsed, that you got to figure out whether it's how to bend glass, or how to blow fiberglass, or how to, that's an essential part of the process.
Exactly.
Right.
But what I value is there's a humanity that's in your concept, I hope, that you're doing this for people, and there's a need to make these things habitable and humanly engaging in some way. And so when you conceive of the idea, and then you got to go through all these filters to the end, you got to figure out how to get that to the end product, that at the end, when it's built, it has that kind of humanity. Now, some people don't believe in that, or some people, I mean, the minimalists don't like that because you're supposed to be cold and...
We don't have to worry about those guys.
We don't have to worry about that. No, I think that's, you know, rich people feeling guilty like minimalist houses.
That's over my head.
But since I became rich, no.
You built yourself a minimalist house.
No, I'm just kidding.
Can you see this screen?
Why don't you write books?
Why don't you write books people can read?
Who said that?
That's Nora Joyce, James Joyce's wife.
I love his books. I could read them.
Well, you weren't married to him. And the point goes to a broader discussion, which I think has to do with the accessibility of work and new work. Mahler, Bartok, Cage, architecture, music, Boulez, and others. And if you dial it back many years, maybe hundreds of years, there's a constituency and a story that surrounds building, so that when you make something, there's an audience for it. There's a population who understand it. Let's say there are exceptions to that.
And architecture was an art.
Well, and remains, but
still today?
You think?
That's a big issue.
Okay, let me get to the end of this one, and you can respond, please. So the kind of work that you've done, and the kind of work when you put on the street and you put yourself on the street, and the response varies. It's now different, and that might be worth talking about, than it was a number of years ago. But you're making something that has no story that is shared. There's no collective, whatever it is, myth or understanding or anything.
Oh, I disagree.
So if Schoenberg makes something and they riot in the street or something, you know.
Bilbao, they took out a thing in the paper said, "Kill the American architect."
Well, I wouldn't want to push it that far, but that's the point.
I walked in public next to the president.
Of course, Bilbao, they'll kill anything that moves anyway.
Not anymore.
Yeah, but I think the point is, I guess, to whom are you talking when you make something like that? I mean, there's not a readily available constituency that recognizes it and supports it, so you have to cultivate that, or it's difficult to do.
You know, I don't think about it that way. I suppose you're right, but when Bilbao was being designed and in the press and the models, everybody hated it. And the reason they hated it was the public, the steel industry was down, the shipping industry was down, there were a lot of workers out of work, and the general public thought that the government has gone crazy. They're building a goddamn art museum when we need food in our kids' mouths. So they didn't like the idea of this, and they wanted me to go away, right? You know the story. After it was built, I can now go there and live for free for the rest of my life. If I need love, I just go to Bilbao for a few days.
Does that apply to anybody else?
Yeah, and
you got a line out the door.
No, but the reality is, and this is what not commonly understood, is the building was built for $300 a square foot in '97. $300 a square foot. Museums at the time were twice that.
Right.
Construction. And it has earned $3 billion in 17 years or 18 years for the community. I never expected that. That was.
Did anyone?
Well, they asked me when I was given the job. They said, "Can you do the Sydney Opera House? We want that kind of attention." And I looked at the guy and said, "You're crazy. Your budget's too low. How can I don't." But we worked on it. We had the computer stuff. We had a good client, Tom Krenz. We had a lot of good things happening, and it worked. And so I think ultimately you engage a group with the building and with the aesthetic of it, and it works. Now, I don't know if you can do it every time. I thought it was a magic trick when that was over, but
well, if you apply it to Joyce, and we know whether the wife was facetious or whether the wife was, I don't know, never met her. But the point is...
I thought he was gay.
Anyway, the quote says it's his wife. I don't know what the hell he was.
Okay, well, he had a wife.
Maybe that was the problem.
Yeah, maybe he had a guy wife.
Right. But if you read this stuff over the years, you look at this stuff, and it's not accessible in a conventional way. And I think that's really the simplest point, that here's a book, here's a sentence, capital letter, noun, verb, period, end of the sentence, next subject. And he didn't do that, and so he had to develop, and I'm not sure he's done to this day, a kind of constituency for work which is outside the frame of reference that anybody recognizes. And I think you see that in some of the work that you've been involved in.
You've been talking about James Joyce, and I have Proust in my head, so I'm sorry.
But maybe the same problem.
Until I just looked at it and I realized you're talking about
but
James
the
Joyce.
content is different, but the lack of a constituency is not different, I think.
I met this guy, Jay-Z, a few years ago, and I sat next to him at lunch, and I didn't know much about bibbidi-boppidi and all that stuff. And I said to him...
He claims to.
Yeah. I said to him, who was the first rapper? Because I didn't know what else to say.
Yeah.
And he gave me a few names that sounded like bibbidi-bobbidi.
Yeah. Bo Diddley, maybe.
Yeah, and I said to him, would you consider James Joyce? And he said, who dat? So I sent him the complete works of James Joyce, including Joyce reading Finnegan's. There's a tape of Joyce.
Yeah.
And it sounds pure rap. It's pure rap. But
what was the response to that?
Well, and I ran into him 6 months later, and I was asking him, and he said, I haven't read it yet, or haven't. But,
You can't rehearse what you haven't done
yeah,
yet.
but I think that Joyce was maybe the priests in the church.
The first rapper, James
Joyce. The litany in the church was probably the first rapper, but then Joyce got it from there, being a Catholic and going to synagogue or wherever he went. Not the synagogue.
Okay. No, I think he hated the Irish Catholic Church. So this is...
Oh, these are the pictures you sent me.
Yeah, but that was for the thing with Jeff.
Oh.
It was different, but I used it the other day.
Oh, okay.
And we had a discussion. But this is Lucian Freud, and so I'm connecting this with a discussion of architecture. So this guy is saying that the only real subject, and he's not the only one who said this. There are writers that said this. I don't know about architects. that life is personal, that art is autobiographical, and the only subject you really have a chance to know is yourself. And
I
so
agree with that.
You do?
Yeah,
You don't? Okay.
absolutely.
And so that the discussion is between, in his case, himself and the canvas.
Right.
The painter and the paintee, or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
They're
whatever.
lucky, because we can't do that.
We can, well,
We can't.
okay. Well, this is the question.
It's a little
In other words,
harder, right?
is your house your built
It's
self?
my canvas, yes.
That's you.
Yeah,
That's your canvas.
right.
Okay, that was the question. That's it?
That's
All
it.
right.
And
Okay.
I like it, and I live in it now. And even though I lost
Well, let's
it.
take the house away. Let's take it to Bilbao. Is that your built self? No,
Yeah,
It's up, it's a long
less
time. Friends is
personal,
gone.
but in a way, before I did any drawings, I spent a lot of time studying the Basque literature, art, culture, which is unique, and met a lot of them, got a sense of their ethic and what their dreams are. What are you pointing at?
Wolf. He's always late.
I didn't give you a passport, Wolfie. You're not supposed to get in. I don't let him in, just.
He paid his money, bought it.
Did he? Yeah.
So I guess the point was, is the building your built self?
Yeah, I think
And-
it's your personal thing, but I mean, if you push that idea, it could be taken as an ego, maniacal use of somebody's money and resources to
Right,
express yourself.
Right, because the question is, when you say it's your built self, like Freud said, the painting,
Yeah.
what does that mean? What are we saying when we're saying
That means you have a personal signature and you're bringing it to bear on a problem for somebody.
That's not a pejorative.
No, I don't think it's pejorative. I think it's, for me, it's exciting. It's the addition of the new client, the new program, that excites me about it. And I don't think I repeat myself because of that. Now, other people might think I repeat myself.
We're not worried about that. It just does go back to the you can't rehearse, and how long can't you not rehearse before finally you know,
Well,
and then you are rehearsing. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't know. When I talk to students, if any of you here have been my student, I usually ask them to write their signature, and then everybody looks at it, and your signature is your intuitive, direct. It's not contrived usually. It's usually just, you write it, and they look different. And I think that's what we're looking for, is that individual expression of the stuff we're made of in the mind.
What makes one person different
Makes a
from
person
another?
different from another. And it's interesting to me that when you do that, you're the only expert in it. So it doesn't matter what somebody else says. You're the only expert. So now you may not be discovered by the rest of the world, and nobody might like it, but you're still intact as your own person. And you've seen that with artists. I mean, you see it with, Cliff Westerman did that, and a lot of the great artists don't pay attention much.
Right. Well, I think the premise is fascinating.
And
I don't think
architecture is less prevalent in our time, because there's a whole educational.
Or less said.
There's a whole educational filter.
Against it.
Yeah.
Against it.
Yeah,
So to
and
say
that gets to the point of denying you're an artist.
Well, to say to a student audience,
Yeah.
this is me,
Yeah.
see that on the corner?
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah.
That's the building.
And that's what I think they should do.
Right.
But if they feel up to it, take it on. But I think you can be collaborative with that point of view. It's not, you don't have to be King Kong and egomaniacal.
That's right. I mean, the question is what it means to say that.
But the culture has gotten crazy to where a lot of artists will say, you're not an artist. I mean, Richard Serra on television said that Frank Gehry is not an artist. I draw better than him, and he's a plumber. He said that on Charlie Rose, and this is a friend of mine, you know.
Yeah, but so, we're not so worried about
no, but I think there is that thing hanging in the space about architecture as an art, and if you raise it to an art, then can it be at the service of a big bad developer? I think it can, but everybody has to make their own decision.
Right.
And so when anybody says to me, Gehry, you're an artist, I say, no, I'm an architect.
That's right.
I'd rather say that and get rid of the discussion.
And get rid of the debate.
I don't want to have that debate with that person.
That's
right.
Right. Right. Because I think the words get in the way,
Yeah.
and the artists are fragile,
So
and the architects aren't, so let
if
the artists say
you go
they're
through the
artists.
history of architecture, Giotto was an artist, he became an architect.
Well, crossing that line wasn't
But
a
the
big-
crossing line was, it was an uptick from art to becoming an architect in the old days.
Maybe it still is.
Maybe it still is. So don't forget that.
Okay, let me.
You got a chance.
All right. Let me ask you another one that has, I think we're into this subject anyway, has to do with language and labels and nomenclature that surrounds architecture, just like media surrounds architecture. So I give you a couple of these. Early in the 20th century, 100 years ago, somebody sees Henry Ford and an assembly line and cars produced in a certain way, and comes to the Bauhaus, this is a caricature, and says, they make cars that way, let's make buildings that way, assembly line. Or 20, 30 years later, Tange, Kikutake, those guys get interested in the study of physiology and say, we're metabolists. And this is architecture as a borrower, that it doesn't necessarily own any of these, but it gloms on to events, speculations in the arts, in culture, in science, and says, we're that. And then I would give you another one, which you're familiar with, and Paul Demond shows up and is a literary critic and invents something called deconstruction, which somebody grabs, and it was a literary criticism, and grabs and said, you know, and says it's.
But I talked to what's his name?
Derrida's different. I mean, they connected, but Demond was the guy with, originally.
But I happened to be in an afternoon at Eisenman's office where Kipnis and Derrida and Eisenman and I were, four of us.
Lucky for you.
And Eisenman talked a lot. And then Kipnis talked a lot. And then Derrida didn't talk a lot. And I didn't say a fucking word. I got in the elevator with Derrida, and I said, you know, I understood, he did say enough, and I understood what he was saying. And I said, I didn't understand Eisenman. He said, neither do I. So, you know, language is tricky, and does that philosophical point of view apply to and maybe it does in some way, but I was thrown into it because my house was a sort of a visual onomatopoeia of decon, right?
Not according to you.
Not according to me, but
well,
according
that's the point.
to
that's what I'm asking.
Mark Wigley, who's probably here, put me in a show.
He's way in the back.
Okay.
Can't hear.
I love you, Mark. Anyway, no, it's just that words get in the way, right?
I think so. I mean,
And,
because a lot of these discussions with students and critics have to do with...
No, but if you, as a student, you find that more interested in parsing these sentences and ideas and rolling them around, it becomes a philosophical discussion that maybe applies to architecture. So I wouldn't throw it out. It's just that I'm not personally into it.
Right.
I don't follow it. I went to a couple of lectures at Princeton, and I heard Liz Diller and talk about things, and they asked me to bring Jeff Koons because they were talking about surface. You can imagine the discussion at Princeton about surface, and Jeff is sitting there with me, and so then they asked him to speak, and I knew what he was going to do. He got up and said, "I just make shiny objects because people are attracted to them." Right?
And that was the end of the discussion.
That was the end. I mean, I knew he was going to do that. So it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder, finally, and I think you can approach it any of those ways, and wherever you feel comfortable to grab onto the train and move with it.
Yeah, I think
could be valuable. I mean, I think
that's right.
there are critics. There was a time when there were the discussions at the Institute, Eisman's Institute, that I found exhilarating.
But the answer's, I think, useful, and I think useful to this audience, that it's not "it's so" and the labels are germane, nor is it that they're irrelevant and purposeless, and you have to find a way somewhere into the language that does...
Yeah, but it's also circumstantial. If you're living in Switzerland, it's different than if you're living in Russia, or that if you're living in Beverly Hills, or if you're living in Mexico. I mean,
my sense is the further you get from the origins of this discussion, the more religiously you take it. So somebody will say, now remember, I remember Philip saying to me, "I know what decon's about. It's about the diagonal line."
He said that?
He said it to me.
Wow.
I think he missed it.
I missed that one.
Right.
I thought it was about copying fish. I've been copying fish.
So let me read this to you. This is another quote, and I skipped through this fast. I want to get through to the end of this.
Are we near the end?
Are you getting tired?
No,
Getting
I'm okay.
bored?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
If
So
they're okay
let
with
me
it,
know. Have a drink.
Yeah, good idea. Where do I get it?
Right here.
That's not a drink, that's water.
Well, that's all. This is a school, baby. They know cognac. Oh, maybe there is. That comes at the end. So Kublai Khan says to Marco Polo, "When you return to the West, will you repeat to your people the same tales you tell to me?" And Marco Polo answers and he says, "I speak and I speak, but the listener retains only the words he's expecting."
Yeah, that's a great one. That's true.
Tell us.
Tell you something about it? I don't know. I think it's the same thing I'm trying to say, that if wherever you're coming from, wherever your upbringing, your circumstance, you interpret what's going on around you differently. So you have different opportunities in different places and different things. So it's like water finds its way, sort of, in
Well, I think
rivulets and directions, and I think it's more natural than we allow it to be. And I'm not a naturalist, but the older I get, the more nature is better and more interesting.
I hate that stuff.
Huh? You hate nature?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
It's not a
I just
secret.
did a building with a garden all the top.
the roof.
That's all it is. The building is all the garden.
Well, if it's a building, then it's a
Yeah.
different discussion.
No, but I haven't gone as far as Nouvelle, putting trees on the front yet. I'm getting there.
And Foster puts trees
Does
to
he?
cover the X-bracing,
Uh,
I think. I think
maybe.
what I'm trying to understand in this is how is it possible to listen for something that you haven't yet heard? I think that's what he's saying in a way, that he talks to an audience who already knows in a way. So if you go around and ask people here, they already know what you say means, or what I say means. In other words, they have an a priori way of understanding it. The question is, how do you break that down and listen for something that you don't know?
Yeah.
And are you receptive to that? I think that was
Well, it takes
somewhere in here, that was a
time,
point.
but, yeah, I find that just staying curious is a valuable thing. I was at a Facebook conference last week or something, and one of the people in the audience asked me about when I get stuck. And Megan can say it better than I can, but I'm never stuck because I'm curious to look at what.
You don't get stuck.
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah, right.
It's a different kind of stuck. It's a kind of trust in curiosity. And for me, that started with the Talmud when I was a kid. I'm not religious. I'm nothing. Don't get excited. But
Don't get nervous.
yeah, I'm not gonna do that. But I did.
No, go ahead, proselytize.
The Talmud starts with the word "why" as the first word in the Talmud, and those guys sit around the table and they argue about whether Rabbi so-and-so did so-and-so and did he mean so-and-so. And I think that early involvement with that opened a lot of doors for me, and it got me out of religion totally. As soon as I started asking why, none of it made sense. And I think I believe in that. I believe in that. If you stay curious, it's like the guy on the television says, if you stay thirsty, what's that thing? The old guy with the beard?
The coolest guy on the planet or something?
Yeah, if you stay thirsty.
Yeah, right. Stay
Right.
thirsty,
Well, I'm
my
saying
friend. Stay curious, my
Stay
friends.
I would say stay curious.
You're making beer ads.
Yeah, I am. No, but I really believe in that. 1,000,000%, I do.
Can you see? Can you see it, Amy?
Oh,
So
my God.
we talked about that once. He sent me back something that was about burning books.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the Don
Quixote?
Don Quixote and Sancho, let's say, is the voice of consensus, and the Don says it's a giant, and Sancho says it's a windmill, and the question is,
What is
who
it?
got it right?
Who got it right? Yeah. What I was talking about was the first chapter, I think, in Don Quixote, where they go to his house and burn all his books.
Well, they burn all the books about chivalry.
Yeah, they burn all the books. And,
Yeah, right.
and the guys deciding are the barber, the butcher, and a priest. And they're saying, they read out the name of the book and they say, throw it in the fire.
Right. So you want to commit to one side or the other? It's a question, in other words,
The windmill or the beast? Yeah, I think it was a windmill, but
It was a windmill.
yeah.
Yeah?
But he didn't think it was a windmill.
Well, he's the guy with his signature, and his
Right,
signature says,
okay,
it's a giant.
it's a beast. Yeah.
You're okay? Here's one of your friends. So this is John Cage, a score. And years ago when I taught at Yale, the Beinecke Library collected all his scores. And I went in there and Xeroxed all the scores, and I have them to this day. But I think this has really to do with music as a pattern language versus, I mean, this is your discussion, but along comes Boulez and Bartók and Mahler and Cage. I don't know if Philip Glass is in that category. And that there's something we can listen for and we know and we recognize, and then there's something which breaks the pattern and isn't recognizable. In fact, I mean, arguably, this isn't auditory. You listen to this stuff? You listen to Cage?
Sometime.
Yeah. And it's tough to listen to.
There's a concert coming up, I think.
Cage.
Yeah, this next few days. Or maybe it's in Ojai. It's in Ojai, they're doing a Cage thing in June. God, I was gonna say something really brilliant, and I forgot it.
Take your time. I mean.
No, here's what I was gonna say. When I was a kid, my mother took me to concerts, and ever since then, I've always been interested in music. Although I never really took music lessons. I never learned to read music, nor did I learn to play an instrument. Although I had a yearning to learn to play the cello, and I had an opportunity to play the cello, and I never took the opportunity. I was busy making stupid buildings. So
there's still time.
There's still time, yeah. But I did. UCLA had an ethnomusicology department, and my sister was in the music department, and I was curious. I went to the ethnomusicology department, and they had a gagaku orchestra, which is the imperial court of Japan. It's 1,000 years old. They have 50 written pieces of music, period. That's it. And all of the musicians are descendants of 1,000 years ago to now. And they never leave Japan. They play in the imperial court. And there was a guy in the ethnomusicology department who was very well studied in Japan and music and so on. And so I joined the gagaku orchestra. I didn't know anything about music. They gave me a little mallet, and I clinked on a frying pan kind of thing.
How'd you do?
And they sent a guy.
Clink at the right time?
Yeah, I learned. And they sent a guy from Japan to teach me how to breathe. I had to go when I clink.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very serious. And I learned to play in this orchestra. Now, I think it's because of that when I heard Boulez, that it came from there, I thought. And so I scoured all of Boulez's writings and found no reference to it. And then when I talked to him about it, he didn't talk about it. Recently, I found a book in which there's one page and one chapter where he mentions it.
Yeah. But
it's really in his music. So there was a roadmap for me from that to him, and then I by chance watched him conduct in New York. I was sitting on the stage. They had the rug concerts, and he was conducting, I forget what. And he was very minimal. So minimalism we were all excited about, right? So here's this guy doing this. Never this,
Yep.
Never there. And the passion it was amazing. It became a real thing for me to say if you could get the passion without, but minimalism that I've seen doesn't do it. It just
excludes
it excludes the passion. Yeah. So that's always been a an issue for me. How do you
Right.
get it? And
I think what I was looking for, you're talking about his roadmap, and I'm talking about the roadmap to him, which is slightly different. I think what I'm saying is the context of this stuff doesn't lead to this. It doesn't get you to there. In other words, if you're going to go from here to here, you got to do something.
yeah,
You got to go outside it, really. In other words, beauty you know, and beauty you don't.
yeah. But Cage was hanging around with Jasper and Bob Rauschenberg, and they were talking to each other a lot. So there was a commonality and he was interpreting, not that he got anything from them, he was his own
Right.
person, but there was stuff going on. There was a communal effort going on there that made sense.
It's shared.
It's a shared thing. And when he did 4 Minutes of Silence, of course we understood why he got there, given the people he was hanging out with, what he was doing, what he was talking about and thinking, the literature he was talking about, and so on. It all
Again,
made
it
sense.
jumps boundaries, because when you look at this, the musicians who are playing this
Yeah.
are the only ones who see the score.
Right.
And you and I are in the audience, and we don't, which seems a little unfair.
Yeah.
It's not really
We should
auditory.
change that.
Yeah. I mean, they ought to put it up on the screen, because the boundary that's been jumped is that music is auditory. And this seems to say that music is visual, which is different.
It's both, I think. I mean, when I was in architecture school, I used to listen to the Brandenburgs concertos all the
My
time.
dad used to play that for me.
And that there was a structure in it that I visualized from listening to them. It was, I could see Mies and Soriano and all those guys
In your head,
in my head listening to that. So
the Brandenburg Concerto.
Brandenburg, yeah.
Right.
More-
I don't
those
think I
more
ever
than-
told you, I actually played the violin for
Aye,
about
aye.
6 years when I was a kid.
Forget-
My grandfather
got
was
it
in the
here?
New York Phil. Yeah, we're gonna, after this, you're gonna hit the chimes, and I'm gonna play the violin. We put out a hat, and we get some spare change.
Eric is amazing, you guys. You got an amazing guy here. He's literary and very curious in many ways.
Stay curious.
Stay
Thank you.
curious. And I love what he's done. I do.
Thank you. So this is from, can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is from the Lyon Ballet. You know Dan Rosenfeld? You know Dan. He took me to this performance of the Lyon Ballet. I mean, here's what's interesting about it. This is not the figure of the lady. So the lady comes out and she's padded up.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's not her physiologically. And she comes out on the stage, and you look at her, and this is a performance hall, and you look at her, and there's no way in hell that she can do what's requisite to be a sophisticated ballerina.
Yeah.
It's not possible, because they camouflaged it, okay? And then she starts to dance, and she goes, and she's fantastic. And she can, whatever you have to do, she can do all of that. And then she finishes, and the audience is fascinated by the juxtaposition between physiology, which is not there,
Yeah.
and you expect to be there, and this kind of Michelin woman or something. But then if you didn't get it, so I didn't like this part, but then you get to the end, if you don't get it, then she takes it all off.
Yeah, I know.
Don't you get it, you idiot? And so she takes all the stuff on, throws it on the floor. But there is something in this that goes back to what you see is what you get, or what you see is what you understand, or what
Yeah, but this is,
but you don't.
this is like the 4 Minutes of Silence, so it's a shock thing, right? In a way.
That's right, because it does something you don't expect it to
You
do.
don't
But
expect.
the meaning.
But that idea of doing that came out of the 50s, 60s artists and John Cage. And
Yes.
that kind of thing, I think. That well, maybe it happened before. I mean, the unexpected. Who's the guy with the urinal?
I don't know. You talking about the Dada stuff?
Duchamp, yeah.
Right.
It's kind of that kind of thing where you sort of test the world by some amazingly simple, shocking idea, and then it opens the door to some kind of discussion maybe beyond that. But
Well, I think in terms of an architecture discussion in an audience like this, which is largely a student audience, that there's so much in the discourse that has to do with a column or a beam or a duct or a pipe or a sprinkler head. It's a kind of literalism of operational pieces of the building. In other words, you show what's there. This is an old discussion, but it's not over. And then you get a context where what you're seeing has actually nothing to do with an internal reality. So it's a kind of psychotherapy.
It does, these kind of things do continue to show us that there are no real rules that we understand for art and for music and probably for architecture.
And they're running together.
And that the idea that small groups of people at a college or in a get together and create a construct of language and image that has a resonance enough to overpower innocent people.
Yeah.
In a way,
yeah.
You know, it's like Ken Frampton. He hates my work. He calls me a artist monkey, right?
I don't know what he calls
I ain't seen anything.
We had him around here, actually.
I know, and I like the guy, but
it's a wide open school.
He sort of puts things in a box. This is a box, and so I was on a jury with him at Yale with Eisman, and 10 students presented, and Ken Frampton picked the worst one as the best. And Peter and I were standing there, what are we missing? What's wrong with this story? So I think a person can develop a sort of a discussion, a language, an idea that sort of puts a box around something, and if you don't do exactly what he says in that box, you're out, man. You're something else. That's what.
But that's his problem.
I know it's his problem, but
but people are listening.
There's a lot of stuff like that
That's
around.
Right. That's right.
Least,
and we have to.
I think it's still going on. Probably not at SCI-Arc, but.
Well, he was here. We had a discussion like this.
Yeah.
Didn't work very well, but we tried.
No. So you know, you want to say, Kenny, get over it. You know, don't you see the train's left the station? It's a new discussion.
Let me get. There's one more here.
But I very suspicious of those kind of quasi-religious constructs.
It is religious, and there are allegiances that go. You're either God or the devil.
She's going to kick us out. We're getting the hook, man. We're getting the hook.
One more for that. So this is. I wanted to say to the audience that, and I think many of you know this.
Thucydides, holy shit, you're really getting heavy.
I know. Well, you asked for it, baby, so here it is. That's not how you pronounce his name. You know how to pronounce his name. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Actually, that's not the point.
It's not pronounced that way?
I think it's Thucydides, isn't it?
Oh, well, I'm from Canada, you know.
In Canada, they don't pronounce the CY.
Right.
But what I wanted to say is that Franken Berda made a very generous donation to SCI-Arc 2-3 years ago. And the interest off that donation is used to give something called the Gehry Prize, which is the best thesis at SCI-Arc. And from time to time, Frank's been involved in that evaluation. And the money goes to the student who wins. But I never shared this with you, so better never than late or something. So this is the quote that accompanies the prize. They were born never to live in peace and quiet themselves and to prevent the rest of the world from doing so.
Yeah,
Is that an appropriate caption?
I guess.
Yeah.
Thucydides, okay, I'll say it.
Well, he's writing about the Athenians. That's all he had in front of him.
No, it's a great honor to be part of this family for all these years, even though I haven't been here very much. But I'm watching and spending time with some of your graduates, I think, or I find their way into my place. I think it's a welcome place. It's a different kind of freedom, and we need it. And so that's. Now you've gone too far, but no.
Yeah, we keep going even further.
Yeah.
I have the last thing I wanted to ask you, and I think is a fairly standard question. We get a lot of it, and it has to do with L.A. And yeah, that one.
Well, it is different to be. That's the point that I was making about place.
Right.
Right.
Well, so somebody comes in and they say, this is a little bit the discussion, is it the people or is it the environment? And that as a city that you've been a part of for a number of years, so there's a context for that made it possible or had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, it is. I'll tell you what it is.
Let me get to the end of it. 1 second. Wait a minute. And that LA is a place that facilitates that, or LA doesn't deserve its reputation. It's a pretty mundane, banal place with a few exceptional people who have done things. So really the question is how do you address that, and how do you address it over time?
Well, I think the facts pretty much bear what I'm going to say out, that for most people from the East Coast probably and Europe and have generally not paid much attention to us. They don't take people from LA seriously. And that's been probably, for me anyway, the freedom to play out in whatever games I was playing without anybody believing I was doing anything. And I didn't have that scrutiny.
And that's an asset.
And that I found to be an asset. And I think had I lived in New York at the time of the whites with those guys, everybody was sort of in everybody's face about, and there was they were coagulated around some kind of a thing, which none of them were really, but.
And LA is a city with no intellectuals.
Well, that's the feeling, but it wasn't true. Thomas Mann lived here. Stravinsky lived on Weatherly Drive.
I think Brecht was here at some point.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Aldous Huxley.
So we have our...
Fiatagorsky, Jascha Heifetz, Schoenberg.
But the sense with New York, I don't know to what extent.
And the artists, there was a lot of art out here too.
Right. But to what extent, for me, I can answer for you, I don't know, to what extent a benediction from New York mattered. I mean, you mentioned Philip, there's Herbert, but there's Herbert, there's John Dreyfus, there are a number of people in different ways.
Well, John Dreyfus was a great force in this town that gave you credibility, Tom, a lot of people.
Yeah.
The little club we all had.
Right.
Where there was a picture of all of us, and some critic just said I was standing slightly apart. Is that true?
You were.
In that picture?
I didn't study.
I didn't feel like I was a part of it.
No, you're right in the middle.
I was right in the
Didn't they
middle.
do that Domus thing? It was like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
I don't know what it was, but
I remember that.
I think that we weren't taken seriously.
Right.
And that was a positive, because we were just in our formative years. We didn't want to be taken.
We still are.
Yeah. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Terrific. Too long? Too long? You want to answer a question or two? Yeah. Anybody, what? Yeah, anybody up for interrogatories, corrections, questions? Not speeches?
They're speechless. Oh, man, won't you have us?
Over here. Thank you. I'm right over here.
Where are you?
I'm right here. Thank you for a wonderful conversation tonight. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have this event at SCI-Arc. I have a question for Mr. Gehry, and it has to do with how you've evolved your sensibility. And what I'm curious about is how your values toward architecture have changed over time. And
Wait a minute, what's that? My value?
One question you get.
Okay.
Yeah, keep them separate. Get to the one point.
That's a Gettysburg Address. Huh?
Sorry. I guess the primary question is how have your values toward architecture changed over time? That's the primary question.
Well, I still happy doing it, and I still have enough of a naive sense of accomplishment, even though it's varied and depends where in buildings and what you do, but I'm still optimistic. Of me? What was going on? I missed that one.
I just took a picture of the audience as I packed in. I thought it was nice.
Okay. Anyway, I still have the same values. I really believe architecture is a wonderful profession. I think it has been marginalized a lot, and I'm in a fighting mode to regain our seniority and priority. I'm 86 years old, so I ain't got much time, but I really think the path to it is through the technology and through the taking more responsibility for your work. And I recently guaranteed almost a building that would be within 10% of the budget. And I delivered it within 3%. And it doesn't look like a building that would come into would be budget conscious. So I think taking those kind of risks and that kind of responsibility, and you can do it because you got the tools to do it. And if you use those tools, you can deliver. And so that's become really important to me as something to fight for as a for the future generations. I also believe in arts education as an important part of our world. And I've gotten involved with elementary school education in the arts. There's 100 schools in California which less than 5% of the kids graduate elementary school. And the law enforcement people predict jail cell and all of that based on those figures, because they know those kids are going to end up there. Pretty cynical. And it doesn't take much to go to a school. You should all do it. Go to a school and talk to a bunch of kids and turn them on about making things with their hands. And once they do, they become involved enough that you can, I've been able to teach math and civics and all kinds of things at elementary school by just having kids paint a little box and say it's a city hall or it's a library or something like that. So I believe we're still relevant. I still want to see it happen. I'm doing the things that I'm interested in, and I hope everybody will do the same.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.